It was an unseasonably warm Tuesday morning in the late autumn of 2023 when the world of royal memorabilia and palace protocol was turned completely upside down. The news cycle, usually preoccupied with political squabbles or celebrity gossip, was about to be consumed by a story so bizarre, so intimate, and so historically significant that it would dominate headlines for weeks. It all began not in a grand stateroom or a secure museum vault, but in a dusty, forgotten storage closet within Clarence House, the London residence of Queen Camilla. The man at the center of the storm was not a disgruntled royal servant or a tabloid journalist with a long-lens camera. He was a contracted security guard, a man in his late 50s named Arthur Pendleton, who had been working for a private firm that supplied personnel to the royal household for over a decade. To his colleagues and the permanent staff, Arthur was a ghost. He was reliable, punctual, and utterly unremarkable. He clocked in, did his rounds, and clocked out. No one paid him much attention, which, as it turned out, was his greatest asset. For years, Arthur had harbored a secret obsession. It wasn't with the royal family themselves, but with their history, the tangible artifacts of a bygone era that held the secrets of power and ceremony. He was a quiet autodidact, spending his evenings reading books on royal fashion, heraldry, and the intricate rituals of the coronation. He could tell you the difference between the St. Edward's crown and the imperial state crown, and he knew the exact weight and symbolic meaning of every orb and scepter. This knowledge, however, was not born of reverence, but of a deep-seated, covetous curiosity. He wanted to see these things up close, to touch them, to feel the weight of history in his own hands. His opportunity arrived when he was assigned to a less frequented wing of Clarence House, an area undergoing minor renovations. His new patrol route included a narrow corridor lined with doors that were always locked. Most of them were unmarked, leading to staff quarters, electrical rooms, or storage. But one door, at the very end, was different. It was made of a darker wood and had a more substantial old-fashioned lock. Arthur had noticed it on his very first day on this new beat. His curiosity, dormant for so long, began to stir. And he started by simply pausing in front of the door during his rounds, running his fingers over the cool, polished wood. Then he began to examine the lock. It was a sturdy chub, but it was old. He knew from his encyclopedic knowledge of such things that these locks, while formidable in their time, had vulnerabilities. The obsession took hold. He began to spend his breaks in the staff canteen, not talking to anyone, but listening. He overheard a conversation between two maintenance workers discussing the old queen's things being moved around. His heart hammered against his ribs. The old queen. They had to mean the late Queen Elizabeth II. Weeks turned into a month. Arthur, the invisible man, started to plan. He learned the patrol schedules of the other guards. He noted the times when the wing was at its quietest, usually in the dead of night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. He acquired a small, high-quality lock-picking set, hiding it in the lining of his security jacket. He told himself he just wanted a look, just a peek. He wasn't going to steal anything, just witness history. It was a lie he told himself to quiet the voice of his own conscience. The night finally arrived. It was a Tuesday, just like any other. The palace was quiet. The king and queen were not in residence, away at a private engagement in the countryside. The skeleton staff that remained were settled in their offices or in the security hub, watching the banks of flickering monitors that showed empty corridors and silent courtyards. Arthur completed his first 2 rounds with meticulous precision, logging his times perfectly. At 2:15 a.m., he began his 3rd round. He made his way to the quiet wing, his footsteps silent on the thick, faded carpet. He stood before the dark wood door. His hands, despite his years of stoic calm, trembled slightly as he pulled out his pick set. The minutes ticked by. The lock was tougher than he had anticipated. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He listened for any sound, any approaching footstep, but there was only the hum of the old building's heating system. Then, with a soft, satisfying click, the bolt slid back. He pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him, plunging himself into absolute darkness. He pulled out a small, powerful LED flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp path through the black. He was in a large walk-in closet. But it was no ordinary storage space. It was a mausoleum of memory. There were racks of garment bags, each one labeled with a handwritten tag. He saw names like Ascot 1977 and State Banquet Germany 1992. He passed them by, his breath catching in his throat. Then, in the far corner, taking up a space of its own, was a single, enormous garment bag. It was made of a heavy-duty white cotton canvas, and it seemed to glow under his flashlight. A small, discreet label was attached. It read, simply, Coronation, 1953. This was it, the Holy Grail. Arthur's hands were shaking so badly now he could barely unzip the bag. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and slowly pulled the zipper down. The sound of it was like tearing silk in the dead of night. As the bag parted, a cascade of white satin and silver thread seemed to spill out into the beam of his light. It was Queen Elizabeth II's coronation robe, not just any robe, but the robe of estate, the supertunica, the magnificent, breathtakingly beautiful garment that a young princess had worn to be anointed queen. Arthur had seen pictures of it 1,000 times. He had read about its design, commissioned by Norman Hartnell, a masterpiece of embroidered symbolism. But seeing it in a photograph was like looking at a map of a country. Standing before it was like actually being there. He carefully pulled back the bag further, revealing the full, awe-inspiring spectacle. The robe was a river of white Duchess satin. So heavy and rich it seemed to flow like liquid mercury. It was encrusted with a breathtaking profusion of embroidered emblems in gold and silver thread. There were the rose of England, the thistle of Scotland, the leek of Wales, and the shamrock of Northern Ireland, all woven together with delicate wheat ears and olive branches, symbols of prosperity and peace. The sheer detail was mind-boggling. Each tiny petal, each minuscule leaf, was crafted with a precision that seemed almost superhuman. The light from Arthur's torch danced across the metallic threads, making the whole garment shimmer as if it were on fire. Overwhelmed by the sheer presence of the thing, Arthur reached out a single tentative finger. He touched the satin. It was impossibly smooth and cool under his skin. He traced the outline of a Scottish thistle, the raised embroidery rough against his fingertip. And he could feel the history, the weight of the moment it had witnessed. He imagined a 27-year-old Elizabeth, her face a mask of solemn duty, walking slowly down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, this incredible weight upon her young shoulders. He imagined the eyes of the world upon her, the weight of a crumbling empire and a new commonwealth resting on her resolve. He felt a connection, not to the woman, but to the moment, a moment frozen in silk and thread. He was so lost in his reverie that he forgot the time. He forgot where he was. He stood there for what felt like hours, simply gazing, committing every detail to memory. Then he heard it. A faint sound. Footsteps in the corridor outside. His blood ran cold. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his system. He fumbled with the garment bag, trying to zip it back up. But his hands were clumsy, useless. The zipper snagged on a piece of the delicate fabric. He pulled at it frantically, making a small ripping sound. The footsteps were getting closer. He abandoned the zipper, switched off his torch, and pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. A sliver of light appeared under the door. It was another guard doing an unscheduled check. The guard paused. Had he heard something? The doorknob rattled slightly. Arthur's heart was a drum in his chest. Then, after an eternity, the footsteps receded. The guard moved on. Arthur waited a full 10 minutes in the absolute dark before he dared to move. He turned his light back on, his hands still shaking. He looked at the robe. The small tear was barely visible, a tiny pull in the satin near the zipper's edge, but to Arthur it was a glaring wound. For he had damaged it. He had desecrated the most sacred garment in modern British history. He managed to zip the bag up, his movements jerky and terrified. He let himself out of the closet, locked the door with trembling fingers, and completed the rest of his shift in a daze. For days, Arthur was a wreck. He expected sirens, police, an arrest at any moment. He expected to be confronted. But nothing happened. The small tear went unnoticed by the staff who occasionally checked on the storage. The world moved on. Arthur, however, was a changed man. The experience had not sated his curiosity. It had inflamed it. The touch, the sight, the sheer proximity to history had created a hunger he couldn't control. The invisible line he had crossed had vanished. He now felt a strange, possessive connection to the robe. It was his secret, his moment. And the obsession grew. He began to visit the closet more often. At first, it was just a quick peek, a few stolen moments of gazing. Then it became a ritual. Every Tuesday night during his shift, he would slip into the closet and commune with the robe. He would take it out of its bag, laying it across a nearby table that was covered with dusty sheets. He would photograph it with his phone, capturing the intricate details he had first seen. He would run his hands over it, imagining the weight of the crown, the solemnity of the vows. He began to research its history more deeply, learning the names of the embroiderers, the journey of the silk from the Far East. He was no longer just a guard. In his own mind, he was its secret curator, its silent guardian. But a secret like that is a heavy burden, and Arthur, isolated and consumed, and eventually did what all people with a secret eventually feel compelled to do. He needed to share it. He needed someone else to see, to validate the incredible thing he had found. He couldn't tell a friend or a colleague for fear of being caught. So, he turned to the anonymous, endless expanse of the internet. He found an online forum dedicated to royal history, a place where enthusiasts and academics debated the provenance of tiaras and the cut of Victorian mourning dresses. He created a throwaway account with a meaningless username, and then he made his first tentative post. It was just a question. Does anyone have high-resolution photos of the embroidery on the 1953 coronation robe? The responses were immediate. People posted links to books, to grainy film stills. Someone lamented that the details were lost to time, or preserved only in the memories of a few aging dressmakers. That was the spark. The desire to be the one to provide that lost knowledge was too strong. A few weeks later, Arthur posted again. This time, he included a photo. It was a close-up of the thistle, taken with his phone, slightly blurry at the edges but sharp in the center, showing the intricate silver and purple threadwork in stunning detail. The forum exploded. People were amazed. How had he gotten such a clear image? Was it from a new book, an archive? Arthur, emboldened by the adulation, posted another, and another. Each week he would share a new detail, the eye of a lion, the petal of a Tudor rose. He became a legend on that forum, a mysterious benefactor known only as the Robe Keeper. The posts were traced, of course. It took a sharp-eyed forum member and a retired journalist with a background in digital forensics to notice a tiny piece of metadata in one of the photos that hadn't been properly scrubbed. It contained a location tag, not a specific address, but a general area code that placed the photo firmly in the Pimlico area of London, the home of Clarence House. The journalist didn't go to the police. Instead, he contacted a reporter at a major London tabloid, a man named Leo Townsend, who had made a career out of royal scoops. Leo was skeptical at first, but the sheer number and quality of the photos were undeniable. He contacted the royal press office with a carefully worded inquiry. He didn't mention the photos directly, but he asked about the security and storage protocols for historic garments, specifically mentioning the coronation robe. And the question was met with a polite but firm no comment, but Leo could sense the panic behind the silence. He knew he was onto something. Inside the palace, the inquiry triggered a quiet but frantic investigation. Security footage was reviewed. Access logs were checked. Nothing seemed amiss. Then someone decided to do a physical inventory. A senior member of the Royal Collection Trust, along with a trusted lady-in-waiting, went to the storage closet. They unlocked the door, went to the corner, and unzipped the bag. The sight that greeted them was one of horrified disbelief. The robe was there, but it had been handled. It was slightly askew. And then they saw it, the small tear near the zipper. The room fell silent. The lady-in-waiting, a woman who had served the late queen for decades, began to weep silently. And it wasn't just a tear in a piece of fabric. It was a tear in the fabric of history, a violation of a sacred trust. The police were called immediately. The investigation was handed over to Scotland Yard's Royalty Protection Command. The focus immediately fell on the staff. Everyone who had access to that wing was questioned. The list was small. Arthur Pendleton was called in for an interview. To the experienced detectives, he was a mess. His answers were vague, his hands sweated, and his eyes darted around the room. They searched his locker and found the lock-picking set. It was enough for a warrant to search his small, dingy flat. There they found the evidence they needed, not the robe, but the digital proof of his obsession. On his computer, they found folders and folders of photographs, hundreds of them, each one a high resolution. Intimate portrait of the coronation robe. They found his posts on the forum, his conversations with other enthusiasts. They found his searches, his research, his entire secret life. Arthur Pendleton was arrested and charged with burglary and criminal damage. The news broke like a thunderclap. The headline, dreamed up by a sub-editor at Leo Townsend's paper, screamed across the world, "Guard ransacked Camilla's closet and revealed the late Queen's Regal coronation robe." The story was a sensation, a bizarre mix of high crime and low farce. The public was captivated. Who was this man? Was he a madman? A master thief? A lonely eccentric? The court case was a media circus. Arthur Pendleton, a thin gray man in an ill-fitting suit, stood in the dock, his obsession laid bare for all to see. His defense lawyer argued that he had no intention of stealing or selling the robe. He was driven by a profound, if misguided, passion for history. He was, the lawyer argued, a man who loved the monarchy and its symbols so much that he simply wanted to be close to them. The prosecution painted a different picture, a calculating man who had meticulously planned and executed a series of burglaries, who had used his position of trust to gain access to and desecrate a national treasure. They highlighted the tear, a permanent scar on an irreplaceable artifact. The judge, in his summing up, had to weigh the man's obsession against the severity of his crime. He acknowledged the lack of intent to profit, but emphasized the profound breach of trust and the distress caused to the royal family and the nation. Arthur Pendleton was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The story, however, did not end with the sentencing. In the halls of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, the incident prompted a sweeping review of security protocols. The storage of historic items was tightened, with new digital locks, motion sensors, and a strict 2-person rule for accessing sensitive areas. The tear in the robe was carefully examined by a team of textile conservators. After months of delicate work, using microscopic stitches and threads dyed to match the original 70-year-old satin, it was repaired. The repair was invisible to the naked eye, but a small note was added to the robe's archival file, detailing its strange, brief journey out of history and back again. As for Arthur Pendleton, he served his time in relative anonymity. In prison, and he was just another inmate. But in the world outside, he had achieved a strange kind of immortality. He was the man who touched the untouchable, the invisible man who, for a few months, became the secret keeper of a queen's most sacred garment. He had seen with his own eyes what millions had only glimpsed in photographs, and in the end, it was a secret he simply could not bear to keep.